Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This session will be recorded. Hello and welcome to Sterling and VMware's Power Block session. I'm Megan Moore, Sterling's VMware Partner Business Manager. We know your time is valuable, so we want to say thank you for choosing to spend a portion of your day with Sterling and VMware. Before we dive into the demo, I wanted to give you a brief overview of Sterling's capabilities. Sterling is a principal VMware partner and a preferred services partner authorized to sell and service VMware solutions to customers across the nation. With 50 plus technical staff and 75 plus sales staff, all trained on VMware offerings, we are sure to provide you with an industry best value on all of your client to cloud IT needs. As you can see from the slide, Sterling holds many VMware competencies, including 2 master services competencies and more coming soon. Next slide, please. Sterling offers complete customized solutions from client to cloud. We serve on multiple federal, state, and local government contracts, and we support all industry verticals. Security is of the utmost importance here at Sterling. We have a robust, secure supply chain, including OTIPs and CMMC certifications. For any questions about Sterling, please use the email aliases you will find at the end of the demo. For questions during the demo, please put them into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them at the end. Now, I will turn it over to Cloud Architect Nathan Bennett to demonstrate vRealize and Terraform.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And thanks everyone for being here today. So again, I'm Nathan Bennett. I'm a Sterling Cloud Architect here at Sterling, and I'm the automation guy that focuses on all of these interesting things that kind of join together to create these ecosystems that really help operations and developers work together. That's where I really focus my energy in. And today we're going to look at a marriage of 2 of my favorite solutions, which is Terraform and vRealize Automation. I've worked in vRealize Automation for over 7 years. Terraform over the past couple of years, and I've really seen the strengths between the 2 of them and how if they could only work together, they could be an extremely powerful solution. And so this allows us to dive in a little bit more in depth into what this actually is. Now, in terms of the agenda, we're just going to take a look at the infrastructure overview, some interesting things that show the strengths of vRealize Automation being combined with the strengths of Terraform. And then we're going to jump into the demonstration, and we're going to do 2 different parts. One that's more of a front-end catalog solution, and one that's more a developer-focused code delivery solution. We'll call it that way. But while we're on this slide, just real quickly, you can see over here on the right the number of things that are working together. So the icon in the middle, that's vRealize Automation. And then, we're using Docker, Kubernetes, GitLab, and Terraform, all conjoined within this solution. So it can be a little shocking to see that, but it's okay. We're going to work through this together, and we'll see how this all interacts as we get to that end. So I really like this slide because in the black on the left, it shows the Terraform manifest, or Terraform's infrastructure as code. And then in the white, you can see how vRealize does infrastructure as code. For today's demonstrations, we're going to be showing mainly the vRealize side of it. We're going to show some differences in the Terraform manifest and how those 2 really connect between the 2. For one, I want you to look at that black area where it shows the provider vSphere, and it shows those variables. I'm going to show you this again later on where we don't actually need them. And that's actually part of the solution because vRealize already knows where it's actually going to be deploying it to. And so it already knows the necessary inputs for that solution. We're going to be using Terraform open source, obviously, because this is how probably is the easiest way to connect it with vRealize automation. Open source is a really powerful tool for developers and ops guys to play around with infrastructure as code, but there are definitely some pitfalls there. There are some vulnerabilities there that need to be addressed before you can even think about bringing them into an enterprise environment. And that's really where vRealize automation strengths really come in order to fill in those gaps. After we deploy these, we're going to actually be deploying them into a vSphere and NSX nested environment. And I'm going to be using the vSphere and NSX providers. For those that were with us a couple of webinars back, we actually did this same demo using just Terraform. And we discussed a little bit about how Terraform has some open source issues, right? But this is basically the same demo, but we're going to be doing it in a enterprise fashion that's way more secure. And we could also show some workflows with the developer-centric code delivery solutions. So what does this really bring us? Why is this marriage really cool for us techie guys, and what does the business really enjoy? Well, the first thing that vRealize automation does is those day two actions. So day two actions within Terraform is not really easy to do, and it's not really fun to do. And these are the things like just a simple power on or power off of a machine. In vRealize automation, if you deploy something, you can just log into Service Broker, select that resource, and select the action you want to do. You want to power off or take a snapshot. You can select those. With Terraform, you have to do it through code. That's sometimes a pretty big pain, at least in my experience. And we just it's not really the best way to use Terraform. But bringing these two together, you can deploy the solution through Terraform, and yet you still have those day two actions through vRA. Again, you have the self-service catalog, which is the service broker part of vRealize automation. So you can actually use Terraform manifest and then use variables that are pulled in from custom forms or wherever you want to stipulate those variables, whether it be through ABX actions, et cetera, which we'll get into in a second, and pull that into your Terraform manifest so that when it builds those machines, it's not building static machines that are stateful. It actually can be building a specific set of machines, much like for those that use Kubernetes, it's very pod-like because it has a number of machines and all the different providers necessary for the application stack to be brought up, whether it be load balancing through software-defined networking or things of that nature, right? And so you can just click a button and then it just deploys that out for you. Next, we have the hybrid blueprint resources. So this is kind of like those shared actions where resource blocks or resource groups bring into vRA those day two actions. But basically, a real high level of looking at it is that vRealize automation can read Terraform manifests. And that's really powerful because when we're deploying something through Terraform, vRealize isn't just grabbing it and spitting it out there. It actually understands to a certain degree the things that it's deploying. It understands the basic concepts of resource blocks, data blocks, and things of that nature. And then it pulls those in with the management of vRA. And so this also works when we talk about variables, because if you have a variable in Terraform, a lot of times those variables are sensitive and need to be secured. We can actually utilize vRA within vRA's infrastructure as code to fill in those gaps. And then finally, the event broker extensibility. Now, this is something that HashiCorp is very, very vocal about. They don't want Terraform to be your application stack, your software development and deployment stack, right? They really want it to stay in the infrastructure as code space. Because of this, what they're looking at is basically deploying their infrastructure. And then for the applications, you would actually use either Salt or Chef or Puppet or Ansible or any of those solutions in order to deploy the application. This, with vRA, also brings in, lifecycle extensibility, like a post-provision workflow to use ABX actions or like a Python script or PowerShell script through vRealize Orchestrator as well, which can also call out to different APIs, right? So you have a whole lot more versatility that you can use with that event brokership. Now let's have a little bit of story time. So I think a lot of times we get lost into the technical details. Let's take a quick look of, how does this bring DevOps? What does this really do for us? And how do we really see this working in an enterprise environment? For myself, I've dealt with these type of situations, so this comes very near and dear to my heart. So I've had developers come to me saying, "Hey, we should use this product, or we should use this product," right? And we always had to go through this whole scenario of checking it against different things. So in this scenario, Jack, our mustached developer, says, "Hey, Bob, our operations tie wearing fella, you really need to use Terraform. I think it'll make your job a lot easier. I've been playing around with it with my home lab, and it's really cool." So as any operations guy will do, he'll check for vulnerabilities, for security assessments and things of that nature. And he'll say, "Okay, it's not really secure if we're using open source, but we have vRealize automation, and we believe we can do it this way." So he puts Terraform with vRealize automation with a front end catalog, right? So in the operations mindset, this fits the bill, right? Because now Jack, the developer, can log into Service Broker through vRealize automation and deploy whatever infrastructure he needs through Terraform. In this scenario, we're using, again, vSphere and NSX, right? So he can deploy software-defined networking, he can deploy infrastructure, he can do WinRM or SSH connections in order to make those changes. He can do all of those different things. And so in Bob, the operation mindset, this works, right? This is exactly what they want. Well, that works to a certain degree. So this is like the first front-end use case of vRealize automation in Terraform, whereas you're using it as a catalog delivery system. The next side of it, which is a code delivery, is what Jack was really thinking of. This is where Jack has the ability to directly imprint or change the code that he wants to run. And he can scale up or down the amount of resources that he wants to build within the environment. This is where Terraform really has a lot of strength in its state files. So if I build, multiple front-end application with a single backend, I can, with a couple of changes to my code, scale that out horizontally. So Jack's saying, "Okay, well, isn't there a way that we could do this?" Well, the answer is yes, and we'll take a little bit of a closer look into that. So what that would look like is a webhook request. So this is where Jack pushes his code to GitLab on premises, and then code stream via a webhook using a Docker CI image is going to pull that information into CodeStream, pull the necessary commit information and other information, and then push that into the deployment that's already out in Cloud Assembly. And so by doing this, we can actually scale out a deployment instead of just building another deployment. So it's a little bit more that delivery solution that Jack is looking for. So again, we're going to take a look at this two different ways. We're going to look at it from the ops catalog, where we're just deploying this through a front end. And then we're going to change it up, and we're going to look at it from the webhook criteria as well. Okay, so here we are in our vRealize automation. Again, we're using 8.3, so we have the ability to bring in secrets here, which we're actually going to use for our variables for Terraform. And I can show you a little bit about what that looks like in the blueprints, but that's just another added feature that really strengthens the solution, because you're not actually having to pull in variables or set them within the infrastructure as code components themselves. You actually set them as encrypted variables within the secret management system in vRA. The next part for Terraform that we're going to look into is the different versions. So this is where you can upgrade the versions of Terraform that you're looking at using. By default, you're going to get 12.29. If you want to update it to a newer version, you can definitely do that. As you can see here, I've updated it to 14.6. Now, the next part, which is specific to on-premise vRealize automation, is the managed Kubernetes cluster. So my managed cluster is right here. As you can see, it's just a 2-node cluster that I'm using with a specific connection via the CA certificate. I can take a look and see what namespaces are out there. This is actually just built with Metal LB as the load balancing solution, and then Weave as the CNI. So once you have your version that you need, your Kubernetes cluster, you'll want to create the Terraform runtime. Now, the Terraform runtime on premises is going to be using either a managed Kubernetes cluster or external kubeconfig. That kubeconfig, actually, a fun fact, you can actually use, if you're a Tanzu customer, you can actually use Tanzu clusters in order to deploy the solution as well. You would just use that external kubeconfig for those Tanzu clusters. But you can see here, I'm just using a managed Kubernetes cluster. It's stipulating what that cluster is. I'm stipulating what namespace I want it to be deployed into, which is just a default. And then down here, you can see the image within the Docker registry. I stipulated the 14.6 image since that is the version that I want to use. So let's hop over to, oh, one last thing. I almost forgot. Let me cancel out of this. When you bring in your GitLab or GitHub or Bitbucket, whichever one that you want to bring in as an integration, it's going to ask you how you want to utilize that GitLab or however you want to use that repository. For me, as you can see, I use GitLab a bit. I have a cloud GitLab that has all of my blueprints, or a large majority of my blueprints for vRealize automation. So I've got a storage for that wherever I go. But we're going to use this on-premises one for the webhook component. That's very crucial because currently there's a little bit of an issue between GitLab Cloud and pulling that into an on-premises vRealize automation. But you can definitely still use, if you have an enterprise version of GitLab on premises, you can still use that as your webhook solution. So what does this look like when we build it? So let's go over here to our cloud templates. And we're going to specify under new from, we're going to specify a Terraform cloud template. I'm just going to call this just demo. You can see I've done this a number of times. And we're going to use our demo project. So this is where it's going to look at your repositories and see what repositories you specified as a Terraform repository. So as I click on here, you can see that I have a GitLab on premises. Here's the user, the repository, and what branch, right? So I can specify that, and it's going to pull up the latest commit. Now, for those that are familiar with commit IDs, this might be helpful for us normal folks. We need to see this information here that actually tells us what the commit message was for these commit IDs. As you can see, I've kind of scaled this in and out different ways. And so I'm just going to use the latest one here. Finally, the source directory. So if you have multiple different source directories or folders, for your Terraform manifest, you can specify that here. I'm just going to specify this test one, which should just build a single machine. And now it brings in all of the variables, all of the providers, all of the outputs. As you can see here, I'm not using any variables for this particular manifest, but it does bring in the Terraform version that I'm currently going to be utilizing, as well as the provider and any provider attributes. So we're just going to go ahead and click create. And there we go. It's very basic how this looks, but remember it's pulling in all the information from the Terraform manifest itself. A couple of things that I want to mention here is that the cloud zone is automatically populated. If I go over to, this is the manifest that's actually being pulled in from Terraform, you can actually see that I've commented out all of the variables for user, password, and server. Because vRA already knows this information, it doesn't need it again in order to stipulate, okay, this is how I'm going to connect to that endpoint. By bringing it through this, it already says, okay, this is the project, this is the provider, these are the endpoints that I have, this is the one that I know is going to be used, and it's this one right here. It kind of makes your life as an operations guy a lot easier. One thing to mention here is that there are the configuration source for repository ID, commit, and source. A fun little thing to do here to make everyone's life a little bit easier is to add a input for git commit. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to specify a type as string, and I'm going to specify a default, which is just this commit ID right here. I'm going to bring that up. And then the last thing I'm going to do here is change this to a input. And so we can say input, git commit, and there we go. And so what I've just done is basically changed it into a front end solution where if someone has the commit ID of the last commit, they can actually copy that and paste that, and it'll actually update that commit ID to that folder and deploy that out, right? So it allows a little bit more extensibility from that front end solution. So let's just go ahead and run a deploy on this, and we'll see what comes out of it. So we'll just call it a demo. There's our commit ID. And we'll see it's going to start running through its create initialization. Here's a little bit of a fun thing to do. So if you go into your Kubernetes cluster, remember this is actually kicking off a job within Kubernetes, and run the kube control get jobs. And we're going to stipulate the -- watch here to just say pull all of them and just constantly see what's out there. We can actually see the job. And so we see vRA has actually kicked off a Terraform job. And it's actually got that information, right? We can also hop out of here. We can pull this in. We can describe it. We can get more information about what's actually happening if we wanted to that way. If you're, a kube control fan and Kubernetes and you're really all about that terminal life, have fun. For those of us that are used to Terraform, you can go in here in the history. You can actually see the logs. Now, this is actually where I spend a lot of my time because I'm very used to having a terminal zero screen when I'm running Terraform. So it actually shows me this information, right? So it actually shows me, okay, I'm building this vSphere machine and it's creating, right? So I have a constant logging of everything that's coming from this solution. So I don't want to have to just sit here and watch a progress bar. So that's kind of how this would work in terms of a front-end catalog deployment. Now let's scale something out. So as I mentioned before, we have a WordPress application that's already out here. That's this guy right here, this pre-baked demo. I like to think of it as kind of like a cooking show where I say, oh, this is how you put all the recipe together and this is how you bake it. And then I pull the cake out of the oven and say, and this is it. Now it's actually done. But we're going to do some stuff to it as well. The first thing I want to show here is our day 2 actions. So by clicking on this right here, we can actually see that this is a virtual machine. It's virtual machine web 2, and I can actually stipulate these day 2 actions here. So power on, power off, and all of those awesome stuff, right? So I can still stipulate those things. But all of these are resource blocks that are stipulated within the Terraform manifest. So you have to have a kind of an understanding of Terraform itself in order to find those, machines and make those adjustments. But if vSphere _ virtual machine, you're going to find them. It's not that difficult. So right now, this is our 2 front ends with a SQL backend. Let's expand that out to 3 front ends. And then we want our 3rd front end to also be connected to the load balancer that's load balancing the 2 front ends. To do that, let me hop over to one of our jump boxes, and I'm going to put on the hat of the developer, and I'm going to change the code in order to expand this out. I've actually already created the code, so I can just copy and paste it because I have had many fat finger issues in the past. So let's go ahead and just copy all of this right here. And then we're just going to paste this down at the bottom. As you can see, I'm stipulating virtual machine web 3. So we have web 2, web 1, and web 2 within this manifest. So I'm just going to paste that guy in and then save the file. And then the other thing I'm going to do is add this server into the NSX member pool for the load balancer. And oh, it's right there. So it makes my life easier. So I'll just paste that in and save it. So a lot of this is very easy to just copy and paste from previously built data on the manifest. For instance, here you see web 2 default IP address, and it's basically the exact same web 3, exact same thing using web 3 and web 3's default IP addresses. So I just saved that to my files locally. Now I'm going to commit those up to our GitLab on-prem. I'm going to say scale out 3 node. And there we go. And so that committed it. And now we got to push it by clicking this little button right here. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. Now in an enterprise environment, this would be done via a PR request. And there would have to be, like a cab or a group that actually checks that everything that's running should be there and before they actually merge it. In this demo environment, it's just going to push directly into master, which is going to kick off that webhook. So if we close this down, I'm just going to quickly hop over to CodeStream. And we can see a new execution is running on our pipeline. And we can bring this up. We can watch this execution via CodeStream. We can see how it's running and the information that's here. We can go into our Kubernetes clusters, and we can see another job being kicked off. We can also, and of course, this is the one that I always go to. You can go back to Cloud Assembly, and you can see that there's an update that is running. And then if we bring this up, go into history, so it's probably doing an initialization, and then we should see an update coming in soon, which is normally step 3 of 5. And then we'll start seeing our web 3 box coming up. So here we can also see that our test machine looks like it is up and going. It's probably still doing its finalized checks for that machine. So that is now up and going from that original first test that we did. So what did we talk about today? We talked about leveraging the strength of vRealize automation with Terraform, how these two interact with one another for additional extensibility. There's so much that we can try to unpack here that I think this would just be way too long of a webinar if we tried to do that. I'm trying to keep this as close to 30 minutes as possible. But yeah, with the day 2 actions, with the extensibility for, application layer automation, with the different hybrid solutions that communicate back and forth between Terraform and vRealize automation, it's just a really good merging of both of these solutions that really help build this and, a really useful way for enterprise environments. I'm just going to bring this up real quickly. We should see, yep. Okay, so web 3 is now deploying out. It's going to take about 10 minutes for that to build. I don't think we have the time for that. So I'll just go ahead and bring up our finishing information here. And if there are any questions, I'll take those now. Thanks everyone for being here.
Great. Thanks, Nathan. Yes, we do have 2 questions. The first one is, can we scale down deployments with vRA and Terraform?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's probably with the webhook, because that's where you can definitely scale in and out. With that webhook solution, there is a little checkbox that you can stipulate whether you just want to scale out or if you also want to grant the ability to delete as well. You can grant that access through that pipeline and code stream, but you can definitely scale down as well as scale out.
Great. And the second question is, can we use any providers for Terraform with this solution?
So that one is that's a fun one. So let me actually let me show something really quickly here, because that is dependent on your ability to write Terraform provider statements. What I would always say here, let me bring this up real quickly. This statement right here, this block of code, we haven't really gotten into Terraform blocks, but as you can see, I'm stipulating here that the provider is coming from a specific source in a specific version. You may have to stipulate that very specifically when you try to pull out from any provider. So I would say, yes, you could probably use any Terraform provider with this, as long as you make these required inputs to say, this is exactly where it is, so vRA knows where to look.
Great. And that's all the questions we have today. Thank you so much, Nathan. And thank you everybody for joining. There will be a recording of this session available. So please reach out to any of the contacts listed here on the screen for that recording if you would like it. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks all.